Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today will be start of a series where I'll be going through Christian cope answers to Muslim objections. One of the worst replies and rebuttals that we get to the argument of Jesus not knowing the hour will be highlighted within this video in response to Sanctus, who is a well-known Christian YouTuber. Without further ado, let's get into this video where we will be defending the argument in his response to Sheikh Uthman bin Farouk.
Is Jesus God?
We believe Jesus is God.
So I got a question. How come when it talks about the hour, Jesus says that nobody knows, not even the Son or the angels, only the Father? Here, look at this.
You can take more than one from
But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. It's Mark 13:32. But you said God knows everything, and if you didn't know everything, you wouldn't be God. And then you said Jesus is God. So how could God know everything and not know?
A common objection many Muslims bring up against Jesus being God in the Bible is that he doesn't know the hour. In fact, many Muslims, like we saw Uthman do in the video, phrase the argument like this: God knows all things. If Jesus is God, he would know all things. Jesus doesn't know the hour of judgment, therefore Jesus isn't God. There are two main arguments a Christian can use against this claim from Muslims.
Within the two arguments that Sanctus does end up providing, one of them is actually considered to be heretical according to the Catholic Church as well as the Eastern Orthodox Church. But what's more relevant here is the fact that Sanctus has a Catholic channel and yet doesn't understand the fact that he's espousing heresy within one of his videos,
which can be used together as well. Firstly, Paul uses the same Greek word, which is to know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1-2. But when he uses it, it doesn't literally mean to know. Paul says this: "When I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come proclaiming the testimony of God to you with superior speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." If we apply the same logic Uthman used to this verse, then when Paul traveled to the Corinthian church, he literally, mentally knew nothing, but only things about Jesus and him being crucified.
Yeah, that's not how it works, Sanctus. Possibility does not equal probability. Just because it's possible, you can translate or you can define that term as meaning declare instead of to actually know in terms of knowledge, doesn't then mean you're justified in order for you to make a probable case for this sort of interpretation. It's kind of like when I say that the term bat can be used within certain contexts to mean an animal or a baseball bat. If I were to say within a context that I'm hitting a ball with a bat, even though it's possible I am using the animal, it's highly unlikely and improbable and not a justified interpretation of what I'm saying. It's way more likely that I'm talking about a baseball bat. So in the same way here, we got to examine the context as well as the historical context to really see what Jesus means in this passage. Clearly, Paul is using the term here in terms of declare, but when Jesus uses the term, as we will soon show, he does not mean it in that sense, and that is clear to see.
But clearly from this verse, Paul is simply applying the word to know, which in Greek is eido, with declaration or proclamation, meaning when Paul traveled to the Corinthian church, he proclaimed nothing else but only things about Jesus and him being crucified. Now the verse Uthman used is Mark 13:32, and it states, "But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." If we apply the same logic as Paul used in his letters, this verse simply means that only the Father will declare the day of judgment, or Jesus' return. This, of course, is on the basis that Jesus claimed to be God, as most Muslims will attack Jesus' divinity on that assumption. And this, of course, leads us into our final argument. Even if we disregard Paul's letters on the word to know, we can still make an argument defending the divinity of Jesus in this verse. Jesus is specific in saying that no man knows the day of judgment, not even the angels or the Son. Notice how Jesus establishes that mankind doesn't know the hour, nor the angels. These both are created creatures, so logically when Jesus mentions the Son, or himself, he's referring to his human nature not knowing the hour.
Okay, so just like a quick lesson on this point, and then we'll go back to refuting the whole idea that the context actually is justified to give the interpretation of the clear. Within this sort of response, where you say that Jesus in his human nature did not know the hour, this is actually heretical, as I mentioned before. This is a heresy known as the Agnoate heresy that was espoused within the 5th to 6th century, and it was condemned by the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Church on the basis that this leads to two persons in Jesus, a human person and a divine person. I'm going to be putting sources on the screen within this video for you to see, within Catholic sources for you to actually see that I'm not making this up. This is very well known within basic Catholic doctrines.
I argue this as we can establish that Jesus clearly knows all things and is omniscient. This, of course, is specific to his divinity and not his human nature, which is limited. For example, we read Jesus reading the minds of the Jews in Mark chapter 2, verse 7 to 8. This is something which is distinct to God alone, who is omniscient. What is he saying? This is blasphemy. Only God can forgive sins. Jesus knew immediately what they were thinking, so he asked them, "Why do you question this in your hearts?" As well, Jesus' own disciples declare that Jesus is all-knowing, or omniscient, in John chapter 16, verse 30. Now we can see that you know all things, and that you do not even need to have anyone ask you questions. This makes us believe that you came from God. Later, while Jesus asks Peter if he loves him, Peter declares Jesus as all-knowing in John chapter 21, verse 17. The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Peter clearly understands that Jesus can read Peter's mind or heart, as he says, "You know all things, and you know that I love you." Based on both these arguments, Jesus is all-knowing or omniscient according to Scripture. In fact, he knows the very day and hour in which he will come. But it is for the Father alone to declare the day of Jesus' second coming. Uthman fails to grasp Mark 13:32, and he uses it on Christians who have not studied these issues.
Okay, so now we're getting into the crux of the issue, and that is debunking the whole idea that the context, not just within the context of Mark 13:32, but just the greater context of the Bible on whether it's apparent that Jesus is omniscient or all-knowing, in other words. Well, it's not apparent from the text at all. Actually, we should be taking these verses that Sanctus has displayed as general implications on Jesus' knowledge without it being an absolute testament to Jesus' all-encompassing knowledge similar to God's knowledge. And the reason for this is we have attestation from an early church father named Irenaeus, who comes at around the 2nd century, who states that the Father excels with respect to knowledge compared to the Son. And why is that? Because Jesus says, "My Father is greater than I." And Irenaeus says this is despite the fellowship that the Son has with the Father, that it is known that Jesus does not know the hour, but the Father does. So if it was apparent from the Bible that Jesus truly was omniscient and knew all things absolutely, then why is Irenaeus making this basic mistake? He's an early church father who has apostolic traditions passed down, as well as access to the Bible with him knowing the Greek language. So it's either Irenaeus makes a very, very simple and basic mistake, which you wouldn't expect from him, or this was just the general understanding of the early Christians before they deified Jesus to the same level as the Father. I'm going to take the latter option of the two. In fact, the immediate context of Mark itself actually makes it clear that Jesus is talking about knowledge. I explained this in detail in my previous video, so I suggest you guys to check it out. But to make it simple, Jesus, both in Matthew as well as in Mark, where this verse appears, gives us examples of cases where people didn't have knowledge of certain events. And Jesus continuously says to watch out and be aware because we don't possess certain types of knowledge on when the hour would come. So it's clear he's not talking about declarance here, but rather knowledge. So just to summarize, The first explanation is insufficient for Sanctus because it is heretical to say that Jesus doesn't possess knowledge of the hour in his human nature. And his second explanation is unjustified because despite those verses he displayed, early church father Irenaeus still says that the Father excels in knowledge compared to the Son, as well as the very fact that Mark 13:32, within its context, as well as the version in Matthew, both make it clear Jesus is discussing knowledge here and not declarance. That's it for this video. If you guys want to see more videos like this one, where I go through, really bad responses from Christians to these sort of potent arguments, then be sure to like and subscribe so I know this is the type of content you want to see. And if you want to support the channel to produce more content like this, then be sure to donate to my GoFundMe or support me on my Patreon, inshallah.